So, in the next edition of The Government Should Be Playing the Song Breaking Benjamin Failure, the government have failed when it comes to giving out contracts, when it comes to NHS gowns. And in this case, it's not actually the contractor's fault here. From what I've read, it's actually the government's fault for the way they've written the contract out, which could have been by design, but most likely it's down to incompetence. But in this case, it's either or. To be honest, you could make the case for both. So this one's a tough one, and the BBC writing here isn't the best. And we'll go into an article from another paper, the Byline Times, who do a much better job, but the BBC do lay it out here quite well. But apart from the corruption angle, so the use of 10 million, okay, surgical gowns brought by the UK government has been suspended for frontline NHS staff because of because of how the items were packaged. Sterile gowns were bought for £70 million from a US firm last year, but safety concerns were raised when they arrived in one layer of protective packaging. The contract had not requested double packaging as listed in sterile settings. The government says all PPE is quality assured, but Labour has called for an inquiry into the awarding of the contracts. And the issue here is for these sorts of items to be used in sterile settings, it has to be double wrapped to make sure that it is sterile. The BBC has been investigating the purchases of PPE or protective equipment, personal protective equipment for the NHS since the start of the pandemic. It has already been revealed how millions of face masks brought by the UK cannot be used in the NHS as intended. That's from a company called PestFix. So many of the contracts dated back to last spring when the government was scrambling to deal with PPE shortages in hospital because they weren't preparing for the pandemic, because the government, Boris Johnson missed 5 Cobra meetings and the government failed to add to the pandemic stockpile. So, you had shortages in care homes and hospitals. However, officials at the Department of Health and Social Care, DHSC, continued to sign large PPE contracts after the first wave of infections was over in a bid to avoid a repeat of shortages, and they bought so much PPE that it had to be stored in airfields because there was just so much of it that they brought way too much. And you can argue that, we had to buy those just in case we needed it. It's like, no, they bought over the odds way too much at prices that they shouldn't have paid. One of those contracts was a £70 million deal signed in June for the supply of 10.2 million sterile surgical gowns from a US firm called Sega LLC, and that's one of those companies where if it goes bankrupt, the owner isn't really liable for it, and he runs out the back door with the money. The BBC understands Sega, who sounds like a Capcom villain, delivered the gowns on time, but their use was suspended because of the concerns they were packaged. A court document obtained by the BBC shows the NHS infection control experts were concerned the gowns were only single wrapped, when in their view they should have been double wrapped if they were to be used in sterile care settings, because that's when people are getting opened up and things like that, and so any kind of bacteria getting in there is going to cause havoc. The document shows there was no requirement either in the government's published specifications or in the contract with Sega for the gowns to be double wrapped. So in this case, it's not actually Sega's fault, because this is he actually did give the products that were specified by the looks of things. It's the government's fault for not putting in the contract that they should be double wrapped. You can make the case that maybe this is common practice, that this isn't one of those things that has to be written down, but in the case of contract law, it does have to be written down. I'm not a lawyer, but these things seem fairly obvious. So this is the government's massive failing here on the money. The gowns came from the same came from the same firm that paid millions of pounds of UK taxpayer cash to a Spanish businessman to source PPE for the NHS. Last November, the BBC revealed Gabriel Gonzalez Anderson was paid £28 million in UK government cash by Sega. So Sega paid this other guy Anderson £21 million to find PPE as part of the two deals. So this man, Sega, made so much money he could afford to pay another guy, Anderson, £21 million to fulfill the contracts. He outsourced an outsourcing contract, the gall of this guy, for his work on the £70 million contract for surgical gowns, which was separate to those earlier deals. He was in line to be paid a further $16 million, £12 million. Wow, this guy Anderson, money, drinks will be on him. However, documents filed in a US court allege that he then stopped doing any work for Sega, leaving the firm scrambling to fulfill its contracts by other means. It is not clear whether Anderson received any of the money for the deal, so it's very possible that Anderson has basically screwed over Sega, but it's also possible that Anderson wasn't actually paid, and that's why he didn't supply the PPE. But the fact is, why is the government doing business with these guys? It doesn't make sense. In response, Sega said the government could not have been clearer that we delivered the goods in accordance with the contracts and to the technical specifications requested, that we delivered them on time and we delivered them in good value. The government's decision to award the £70 million contract for the gowns is currently being challenged in a separate case in the English courts by the campaign organisation The Good Law Project, who do phenomenal work. I don't know how to pronounce his name, and his name keeps popping up. Big Jolian, the project's director, said the government needed to know what it was buying. It should not be buying from those who are experienced. It should be buying from those who are experienced in the complicated business of supplying medical quality PPE. It also needs to be careful, check on the prices it is paying, so intermediaries, that word, go-betweens basically, aren't able to make tens and tens of millions of pounds at the public expense. And the question is, if this was, the government's own money, if this was Boris Johnson's own money, would he be making these decisions? The answer is no. The government also facing questions over contracts it signed for millions of NHS masks, which now can't be used as intended in the NHS. In April, the Department of Health and Social Care signed a contract with PestFix. Why are you signing a contract with a company called PestFix for NHS masks? It don't make sense. A small Sussex-based family firm for £168 million to supply 3 types of masks. They included FFP3 particle filtering masks. The BBC had found 17 million FFP3 masks supplied to the Department of Health by PestFix will not be used as intended. They failed testing, so how much of this money is the government going to get back here? The answer is probably nothing. This is £168 million of taxpayers' money being wasted. The mask came with ear loops, which the government says should not be used because of safety concerns. It stopped using the mask with ear loops in May last year following discussions with the safety watchdog. Surely you should have spoke to the safety watchdog before you had these masks purchased. However, the government had already brought millions of masks with ear loops because the government was so ill prepared for this that they were desperate. And what that meant is they had to buy PPE because they looked stupid, and then they bought the wrong PPE, which makes them look even more stupid. The BBC has also seen an internal document prepared by the safety watchdog showing another type of FFP3 mask, this time with head straps on, put forward by PestFix, also failed tests. The document says the head straps on several samples snapped and nosebands fell off, and nearly all samples from the first batch. So this company here, PestFix, have failed in their contract. So how much of this money are the government going to take back? PestFix said that these were alternative prototype masks and that were provided as a potential replacement. The firm said DHSC did not want to proceed with the product. So how much of the money was paid to this company? This company saying they were proud to do this, when they failed. PestFix is working with the government and the Chinese manufacturers responsible for the small percentage of items that did not enter the NHS supply chain to ensure the best possible result for taxpayers. So not only are you going to try and claw back money from PestFix, you also need to try and claw back money from a Chinese manufacturer. Good luck with that. However, Labour Shadow Cabinet Office Minister Rachel Reeves has called for an inquiry into the handling of PPE contracts. This is something we spoke about a few days ago, where they talked about, issues with the contract. So, if we go to the Biden Times here, where they spell this out much, much more clearer than the BBC ever could. Government contracts worth £148 million have been awarded to the owner of a fashion accessory brand based in Miami, Florida. So this man with possibly little to no connections with China has been given that much money to do a contract for the NHS. Details of the deal were released by the government yesterday, showing 3 batches of personal protective equipment supplied by Sega LLC in late May. So these are things that are simple, but what we can see is Sega saying is the owner and founder of a fashion accessory brand, which he created while studying in university in Miami. I started college when there wasn't a lot of jewellery for guys, Sega told Forbes. I wanted something that any guy could wear, and I figured that by any guy who can wear a watch, said Mianse. I think that's Sega. So you can tell Sega, he's good. He's probably good at what he does, but at the same time, why are we talking to this guy who makes men's jewelry? An internet search reveals that Sega LLC offered PPE to the Home Care Alliance of New Hampshire in April with a personal call to Nicole failure, I don't know how to pronounce that, listed at the point of contact. So you can see here this guy was openly looking for people to supply them with PPE, but they failed. You know, I mean, in his case, he's not to blame here, it's the government. But you can see there are massive issues here. Maybe it was a bit harsh on the BBC's article. Deploying a budget of £13.8 billion, it has been given contracts to thousands of private sector firms. This is the government, many with questionable backgrounds. A dormant firm, a 44-day-old company, a small luxury packaging company, and a business owned in an offshore tax haven have all been granted large contracts in almost all cases without going to competitive tender. And that's the point here. These contracts were not given out to competitive tender. They were not getting the best price for these products. They were not getting the best companies for these products. Why? Because they gave these contracts to essentially people they had connections with. It's that simple. In most of these cases, this is particularly concerning that at least £364 million worth of PPE contracts have been awarded to backers of the Conservative Party. This does not include the deals given to corporate consultancy giants, many of which have ties to Conservative figures. While many raise questions about the awarding of these contracts, they have been met with silence from ministers. The Health and Social Care Secretary Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson have both rebuffed questions about the procurement of PPE, an attitude that has led some MPs to support legal challenges. And I hope that these legal challenges do bring these MPs and these ministers to court to answer for their actions, because they have failed the taxpayer. You know, given contracts to these rando companies that have been around for only a bit. What? Like, in this case, it's very hard to blame Sega, because Sega did what he was asked to do. You can get mad at PestFix, because PestFix are the ones who failed their end of the deal. But with Sega, he gave, you know, the contract was for single wrapped surgical gowns. He gave those, and all that money was wasted because the government didn't bother to put double wrapping in the contract. That's hundreds of millions of pounds wasted. Sorry, 148.6 million pounds wasted because of the government. So, anyways, I'm going to leave it there. You know, as frustrating as this story is, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.